Good evening. My name is John Wogman, and I am the CPO here at Food Recovery Network. This is the second webinar in our Food Justice Learning Series, and tonight's topic is one that is of great interest to our students, as nearly 70% of our chapter leaders expressed an interest in learning more about gleaning. Before we kick off the event tonight, I wanted to start off by saying that we are going to be talking a lot about farming and land. And these conversations are really important, especially when we're considering on how to end hunger and how to mitigate the impact of climate change. Before starting this conversation, we need to acknowledge that this land was stolen through colonization and genocide. And FRN is based in Washington, D.C., which is the historical land of the Nacotchtank and the Piscataway people. And it's important to recognize the impact that history of the United States and colonization has had on tribal communities and how these issues are still perpetuated today. And for tribal communities across the country, issues of land and food sovereignty are still impacting communities. And in fact, these issues tribal communities experience food insecurity and hunger at much higher rates than white communities, which just shows the interconnected between the past, the present, and land and food insecurity. So I encourage everyone to use this tool that I'm going to share in the chat to better understand the original inhabitants of this land. And I also will share this resource on native agriculture and native businesses that you can support through this link as well. And thank you, everyone. Tonight's webinar is going to focus on farm food loss, which is a significant problem in the United States, as nearly 10.1 million tons of fresh produce is discarded or left unharvested each year. And we know that the pandemic heightened these issues as disruptions in food production and distribution has resulted in unprecedented amount of food waste. And this has impacted farmers, consumers, and communities all across the country. And we are very lucky to have a stellar panel of folks who are working to make sure that we build solutions to these issues and that we aren't wasting nutritious produce, that communities experiencing food insecurity have access to food, and that we're working to build systems that work for our environment as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first presenter. Lisa Johnson is a leader in the U.S. food loss and waste research community and has developed a protocol for estimating on-farm specialty crop loss using direct measurement. She's an independent consultant and serves as an adjunct assistant professor at North Carolina State University. And Lisa has worked closely with national and international nonprofits to provide technical assistance and protocols for estimating reducing food loss on farms. So thank you, Lisa. I'm going to turn it over to you.
So what this chart shows is, in essence, the green part of the bar is the marketable portion and the yellow part of the bar is the edible portion on what I found in the field. On average, over all of these crops, I found that 42%. Wow. If you look at the last bar, sweet potato, this is a particularly important crop where I live in North Carolina. It's our #1 crop. We are #1 in the US of producing sweet potato. And as many of you know, it's a long storing crop and it's highly nutritious. There are also a lot of downstream applications for it. It's used in a lot of processed products, a lot of value added products. That short little bar there represents over 5,000 pounds per acre of edible sweet potato that are left. Now in North Carolina, we have 90,000 acres of sweet potato. And if you do that math, you come up with a little over 400 million pounds of sweet potatoes. Oh. So that's a resource, right, that somebody should be grabbing up and using. Of course, I'm working on a project that tackles that, but you know, problems like these really require everyone pulling in the same direction to get them solved. So let's move on to the next slide real quick. The work that I do in the field, measurement actually prevents losses just by describing the problem. When you show that there is a problem that exists and you describe how big that problem is, many times there's a unique solution that someone already knows that would fit that problem. So with growers, when you actually measure in the field, you can tell them the size of the opportunity they have to market that crop further, right? If there's another truckload sitting out there, they can call a buyer on the phone, sell that before they even harvest it. So they haven't invested much money in it, but they can sell it, and then they can spend the money to harvest it, right, and move it along. It can tell them whether they're making good decisions about stopping the harvest, or if their labor is following instructions and harvesting what the grower wants them to harvest, etc. For nonprofits, it can tell, that kind of data can tell a really great story. When you know how much is available, how much of a supply is available, you can then go to your funders and say, we were offered this amount of produce, but we couldn't capture it because we didn't have the capacity we needed. What we need is 2 more trucks, 10 more crews, you know, and some storage space. And now we've got a story we can tell, right? So that's really important data for nonprofits to collect. At the government level, similarly, if we have a lot of surplus of one crop in a region, maybe that state or a nearby city could be, you know, bringing industry to that area in order to value add or process that crop later. You can go ahead, Sydney. We can skip that part to buyers. So I want to talk very quickly about some solutions. Part of what I want to preach, unfortunately, today is that growers are already using so many short-term solutions to protect the yield that they have. Growers are already working to prevent pests and really optimize all of their irrigation strategies, the cultivars they use. They use custom fertility. I mean, growers are very sophisticated, and the yields have gone up dramatically in fruit and vegetable crops over time. And there are other things that they can work at the bottom of this figure there's other opportunity they have to protect their yield during the season, like preventing damage from work or, you know, equipment coming through the field, preventing food safety hazards, things like that. When you get on into the end of the season, the risk exists for a total loss of the crop or the field. And the types of things that lead to this event is impossible for growers to prevent. So they're working throughout the season to minimize the losses that they can prevent. You can change the slide. At the end of the season, you can keep going for a while here. At the end of the season, there's a variety of factors that, one more, that's good. That there's a variety of interacting factors that lead to crops being left in the field, right? And here are some quotes from growers that sort of describe that. And I don't want to go into it too much because I don't have too much time left. But you can see here, these factors are really important. Whether or not the grower has a buyer, what quality they're looking at in the field. Does the price support them putting a crew out in the field? How risky is the transaction they're working with? Is the buyer very likely to reject whatever they send? And where else is their labor needed around the farm? Is there another crop that the labor really needs to be working on instead? You can advance. Let's see. Yeah, so when it comes to harvest time, growers can no longer prevent losses through the practices that they know and are working on. All they can do is respond to market and weather conditions that they are given, right? And the least bad decision they can make is to leave the crop in the field. So growers make this decision as a last resort in response to these conditions. It's through no fault of a grower that there is a crop left in the field. Hopefully I'm driving that home. Go ahead and advance. When I have worked to interview growers, these are the solutions that they have given me that describe what would ensure they get the entire crop out of the field. And you can see, as opposed to their short-term solutions of like amping up their irrigation so it's perfect, right? These are longer-term solutions that address the entire industry. Like we need to increase produce demand. That's no big deal, right? We need to be eating more fresh produce. We all know that. But unfortunately, it would take more than just the 48 people on this call to make that happen. And there are some other ones on here, some pretty tall orders, like high prices. If you think about fresh produce prices, they haven't gone up in a long time, but all the input costs that are required to produce those crops have gone way up. So there's no real obvious win-win. If growers need a high price for their products, that will then prevent consumers from purchasing those products. And so it's going to take some time to get to win-wins there. I appreciate your attention, and my email address is there. I can put it in the chat as well to tackle any questions that we don't get to tonight, but please.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lisa. We are going to have a Q&A section at the end of the panel's presentations. So if folks have questions, you can send them to the Q&A portion of the webinar. But know that we'll be coming back to Q&A after we hear from another group of amazing stellar presenters. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom O'Donnell, who is a geologist, environmental scientist, an entrepreneur, teacher, a sustainability coordinator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He works at Philadelphia, and he also is an applied research scientist at Cabrini University, where he focuses on solutions for reducing farm food loss, and waste, food insecurity, and hunger. He's also working to help gleaners and new businesses create local food opportunities, food access opportunities, while creating new revenue sources by recovering and selling farm foods that would otherwise be lost or wasted. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and thank you again, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Hey, John, thank you so much. The screen just expanded, so now I can see the Brady Bunch faces of all of us. It's really cool. I'm really happy to be here, John, Sydney. Thank you for inviting me. I always take advantage of every opportunity that's presented to me to interact with Food Recovery Network students and chapters. It's always been a highlight of my career, as a matter of fact, and I'm so glad to be here today and be part of this panel. And Lisa, thank you so much for your presentation and hitting on these really important highlights about farm food. And I'd like to segue off of that a little bit. John asked me to try to think about putting some of the issues in the context of a larger context, and how we collectively, how we all fit into the bigger picture, and including all these FRN chapters that John highlighted are beginning to glean. Some of them are gleaning, some of them are doing more than gleaning, which is just fabulous. And I was reminded several years ago, around 2015, the United Nations convened representatives from 193 countries around the world to talk about seriously pressing problems under this big umbrella called sustainability. So lots of topics that were related to sustainability, or as I like to think about it, keeping this place a wonderful world for my 7th generation grandson, who I hope is Thomas the 8th or whatever like that. But in any case, a lot of those goals that these gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen discussed and described were condensed into 17 actual goals. And many of them touched on food, because food is so fundamentally important to all of us. Can't live without it, right? Food, water, and clean air. One of those goals, Sustainable Development Goals number 12, specifically addressed food waste. And the concept was to cut in half food waste, global food waste, in the retail and consumer section, where most of the food waste has always thought to occur. And the FRN chapters have been doing that with all of their on-campus recovery. They're recovering from food service lots of times, and that's part of that problem solution matrix. But they also focused on what they refer to as reducing farm food loss. And they also, in that very same development goal, suggested that they wanted to promote sustainable agriculture. So food waste reduction, farm food loss waste reduction or loss reduction, and sustainable agriculture, all in one neat little package that really touches on what we're talking about here. We're already talking about farmers. We've already mentioned sustainable ag and food waste and loss. So from the very outset, what we're talking about today, and including the chapters, I really want to speak to the students mostly, because this is all about you. What you do when you think about gleaning is you are connecting to and activating actions that are absolutely essential to achieving global goals. Okay, the globe's a big place, right? Well, how about the United States? Well, in 2015, I think the day of or the day after these Sustainable Development Goals were announced, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Agriculture convened up in UN headquarters and said they were aligned with and have in fact adopted a 50% food waste reduction goal. So now we have this national link, and you can carry it all the way down through the states. Many states have established food waste reduction goals, and sometimes they use a different terminology for it, but it's all part of this system, of our food system. Sometimes they say we wish to, in this community, increase composting to reduce food waste, but also to generate healthy soils and create healthy soils. Others might say we're going to practice new methodologies for converting food scraps into energy. And maybe, pretty much always, they try to focus on issues of hunger relief. So different terminology, but all in the same house: food loss and waste reduction linked to hunger relief, farm food loss and sustainability. And that drills right down into Food Recovery Network and organizations that are working within their local communities. I wanted to mention, just take a minute to mention, to try to link this to farm food loss. I sat in on Sustainability 12.3 Champions annual progress workshop that was held virtually. And this is a group of major international food corporations and major non-government organizations like the World Resource Institute that have come together under this umbrella, food waste reduction, food loss reduction. And they're committed and have targeted to play their role and achieve a 50% reduction. We're talking about major companies. And they gave a lot of information about that. And they talked a lot about their suppliers. But in the course of the conversation, they had a gentleman whose name is Theo de Jager, who spoke at the very end. This gentleman is the president of the World Farmers Organization. And so I tuned in. I was listening to everything, but I tuned into this fella. And he said that when the Sustainable Development Goal 1213 was initiated, he reached out to farmers and agricultural folks from all around the world. And he wanted to engage them in input and maybe debate and conversation about this concept of reducing farm food loss and waste. And categorically, he said the overarching feedback he got from people all over the world, farmers, is what's food loss and food waste? He said, you got to define that for me. We don't speak food loss and food waste talk. For example, Theo said, a typical example might be the farmers would say, well, I plow my fields and I plant my seeds and I harvest what I can sell. And what I can't sell, I let animals graze on my farm field. And then I plow that, what's ever left, I plow that back into the soil. So Theo said, what we call circular economy, it's jargon, right? These folks call it farming. So I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say, I don't understand farming. I'm not a farmer. But Lisa has taught us, how many times, Lisa, have you said, if you want to learn how to help prevent farm food loss and how to do it successfully, go talk to farmers. So guess what we have an opportunity to do in these Food Recovery Network chapters and others, is speak to your local farmers. I took that also, it caused me to sit back and think about our situation here and these numbers that Lisa highlighted. Lisa and the World Wildlife Fund and universities out in California highlighted the severity and the chronic severity of farm food loss in the United States. And I've asked myself, and this is something maybe as students you could ask yourself, why or how did it become acceptable to have that much farm food loss? Now, Lisa highlighted all the challenges that when all the farmers can do, a huge whole list, all of them are complicated to be able to raise crops and sell them. And then there's weather conditions and things like that that can't be avoided. But at the end of the day, how come it's okay? I like to suggest that students talk about that if they're interested in the farm side of things. For me, in my perspective, this is a personal perspective. What I'm saying now is just me, Tom. It's symptomatic of a broken food system because somehow it was okay to have this vast, huge volume of food raised, grown, sold into our food chain system, but it was also okay to have all these commodities not get sold. That's where at least that's one point where our food system is structurally broken and it needs a systemic solution. I also learned over the years, if I get into a problem and I try to rearrange the widgets and the divots and the whatsits about a problem, I don't solve the problem. I just rearranged the pieces. I think it's going to take an intervention, and Lisa said it, and other people will, of all of us to say this isn't acceptable anymore. We're losing too much. There's too many hungry people. There's too much farm food loss and waste. There's too much of an environmental input. It's not sustainable. So this is all like, I hope, like motivation for students to kick back and say, wow, we can make a difference. So here's some thoughts I had. So chapter members, so just for a second, Food Recovery Network chapters that I've met and interacted with are super dynamic. I mean, it's a collection of students that have an interest in social justice, environment, business, meeting the goals of their fraternity, whatever it is, they all come together. They all have different skills, they all have different talents, they all have different, I mean, what a great opportunity to congregate a bunch of problem solvers to come together and figure this stuff out. And it all starts from asking questions amongst themselves, like, what are we gonna do? And maybe they ask, what is our neighborhood, our school, and our neighborhood's food shed? How much of the food that we eat here is local? What are local farmers growing? How much surplus might they have? Look at Lisa's data and you can make a preliminary estimate by crop of the likely amount of food waste or food loss represented in that community. What time of year does surplus become available? Because as gleaners and farmer support, that triangle that Lisa showed had incentivized donations and expand markets. That's where FRN can fit in. I would say incentivized donation, but I'm saying now, I'm like going to a farmer and say, we'd like to sell what we can and donate the rest. It's a new, and Melanie and I were talking about that, a new way of approaching. Can we help you sell what you have that's surplus and donate the rest? How can FRN students with all the business and marketing and economics, social work, how can they help to create a new economy? And Sonya's going to talk about that in terms of some of the work that well, maybe we won't have time to talk about it, but I know that's what she's doing because I work with her all the time on this. If the chapters are in an area that really can't allow them to access farms, don't worry about it. You can engage in this in a huge way because of policy. So a lot of the, you can think of a lot of the solutions that involve going out and helping recover food from farms and getting it into hopefully markets of some sort and donation centers. If you can't do that, there's a lot of policy, out-of-date policy and regulations that affect and limit the ability to, for example, glean food. Some are around labor, some are around food safety. And there's lots of issues of logistics and things like that that are primarily hotspots for policy-oriented people to say, we can make a difference. We've done that at Cabrini. We've had state representatives in the classroom and the students presented information to her that she tried to engage her. And 8 months later, she was introducing legislation in the Pennsylvania State House on issues, very specific issues on food, farm food loss reduction. So there's just tons of opportunities for us students to engage in the areas that are most important and match their skill sets and interests. Just a couple of things to wrap up here. What's EPA doing? Well, EPA has been involved in this for a long time, but most recently, like right off the press, are a couple of exciting announcements that have been made just in this last week. One involves anaerobic digestion competitive grant proposals that were received, submitted, and reviewed. And a group of organizations around the country have been given financial support to help engage, to build infrastructure, which is a huge limitation around anaerobic digestion. One of those was Dickinson College, right in Pennsylvania, because they've already initiated an AD program and they're expanding it. Also, Region 3 initiated the first for us targeted grants program for gleaners. So we've actually funded gleaners. One of them's here today. And that, the gleaner activities involve a community-based solution that involves farmers, businesses, logistics, transportation, and targets. Here's something that's important. There's a lot of food insecure people that don't meet requirements for SNAP benefits, and they don't even meet requirements for charitable. They make too much money, but they're very food insecure because they live in areas with limited access to healthy food, corner stores. The opportunity of helping farmers sell surplus in that particular demographic or economics situation in local communities is really kind of a new focus to address food insecurity. And it launches the economic powerhouse of the United States because money starts rolling to help the farmer and help the gleaner cover costs. So that's a brand new grant program that's now filtered down into Region 4. my colleague, Kim Cherrick, and I saw, Kim, you're here. I know, because I just saw you type in there. So now we're doing facilitating gleaning related projects in Atlanta and Tennessee, and people on this panel are involved in that. Stuff's happening, and chapters are involved. So knock 'em dead, students. You guys, you students, if you want to get careers, you want to work in this field, you want to business, marketing, social media, communications, social justice, I think you're building resumes with what you do. What I tell my students, this is resume building stuff. So include it in your resume, use it to get internships, use it to try to get job opportunities. And you'll, I think, find plenty of opportunities to meet your heart's goals as well as your schooling talent in this area. So I think I'm probably used up my time. I forgot to hit my stopwatch, so I'm going to stop now, John. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Tom. We really appreciate all of your support, your insights, all of your knowledge, and certainly your love of FRN and your words of wisdom for our students. So thank you. We are now lucky to have Melanie Mason join us to talk about her work. She is the food recovery specialist for the Bureau of Supplemental Food Programs at the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Melanie, in this role, Melanie is responsible for the development and implementation of the food recovery program, which strives to reduce food waste and food insecurity in the community she works in. Her position with the Bureau of Supplemental Food Programs allows Melanie to share a passion for agriculture and public service, which she developed through her 3 years through the U.S. Peace Corps as a volunteer. So I'm going to turn it over to Melanie.
All right, thank you so much, John, for that wonderful introduction, and also thank you, Sydney, for having me. I feel honored to follow up on the last two speakers who said so many important things that I agree with. So what I would like to talk about most is incentivizing and facilitating donations, something that Lisa talked about, and how we support farmers. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, good job, John, on getting all that out because it's a mouthful. They, in the mid-90s, put forth some food recovery legislation. It was fairly simple, where they offered some legislative funds, state legislative funds, to food banks to recover food and distribute it. But then in 2017, not because of any legal requirement, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or FDAC, as I'm going to say from now on, decided that they wanted to do better, go above and beyond what was legally required of us as a government entity. And so we created a Gleaning initiative where we work really hard to promote gleaning and educate people about what gleaning is and how it works, and then also assist people in walking through the steps of gleaning or recovering from the field. So just like you've already heard from our other speakers, I spend a lot of time reaching out to farmers and talking to farmers, and I spend a lot of time reaching out to students, people in the waste management system, pretty much anyone who's willing to listen to me talk, and explain to them about all the wonderful benefits of food recovery, specifically gleaning. One of the things that I have found is that there is a lot of misinformation, or people who don't think that gleaning or the donation of food is even legal or safe. I find that to be the biggest hurdle in my position, is just simply educating people. So for all of the students out there, you have this whole panel of amazing people, and I would be willing to bet many of them would take a few minutes to speak with you. And if I were you, I would take that opportunity to connect with as many of them as you can and learn what you can, because once you have that information, you can share it with your fellow students, with your farmers, and you can start talking about all of the many liability protections that exist. The Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act is wonderful, but it is not the only legal protection by any means. And you can start delving into your local laws, your state laws, your county laws, which actually take precedent. And so Florida has a multitude of laws. We even have a very specific law that protects farmers against civil and criminal liability for allowing volunteer gleaners into their property. And so, as I like to say, you know, you go in there, you're the farmer, you're watching the volunteers picking, one of them gets eaten by an alligator, no worries, not your problem. But of course, we hope no one gets eaten by an alligator, but it is good for a laugh. And then, of course, we always want to talk about the incentives. So there is a federal tax donation that everyone can get, all businesses, and in 2016 that was expanded to include farmers, and they can deduct up to 15% of their gross income, and they can do this by working with gleaning organizations. Usually they'll provide the farmers with the reports and the information they need to take the tax deduction. So that's the other arm of what I do, is I promote Florida's gleaning organizations, of which we have many that are fabulous. So if you are interested in learning about connecting with a gleaning organization, please reach out to me, or I'm sure many of the other people on this panel. Even if you're not in Florida, I participate in a lot of groups that go beyond Florida. So if you want to learn how to get involved with a local gleaning organization, I can help you do that. And then you'll have volunteer hours, you'll meet farmers, and you'll learn firsthand about so many of the things that we are talking about here today. So I think that's probably just about my 5 minutes. Again, I'm just so honored to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have about the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Food Recovery Program.
Amazing. Thank you, Melanie. And I think that's really wonderful advice for our participants, all the students on the call, to reach out to all of the amazing speakers to follow up and get additional advice, support, and guidance in having a even more impactful experience with FRN and beyond. And we are lucky again to have both Lisa and Zach here from After the Harvest to join us. Lisa is the founding executive director for After the Harvest, which opened its doors in May of 2014 and has since provided more than 20 million pounds of fresh produce for folks experiencing food insecurity in the greater Kansas City area. And Zach has been gleaning with After the Harvest since 2018, and he is the Gleaning Network Manager, and he works with regional growers to glean and distribute excess produce to partner agencies throughout the area. So I'm going to turn over to Lisa and Zach, and thank you both for being here with us.
Well, you know, we are really excited to be here today, and I am especially excited because of all of the energy that is right here on this panel. After the Harvest, we, like John said, we've been in production since 2014. We have a three-pronged mission, that is to reduce hunger in our area, reduce food waste, and improve nutrition for the people we serve. And we have two programs. We have our Gleaning program, and Zach's going to share more about that with you guys. We also have a truckloads program through which we work with national commercial growers. I mean, on a national basis. We have a farmer's agent with whom we work to secure truckloads of fresh produce that are brought into Kansas City and go right to our food bank, because they have the means to distribute so widely. We serve more than 600 agencies across the metro area through that program, and that accounts for a lot of the volume of the produce we bring in. We're kind of limited. We usually only bring in 18 to 20 varieties of produce through our truckloads program, but through our Gleaning program, we get up there in the 70s. You know, we get a tremendous amount of variety and a beauty in the food that we get through our Gleaning program. And I've been talking about food waste for a long time, so it's so good to hear you guys lifting this problem. It's just a huge problem, and it's so shameful whenever you look at the vast waste of this wonderful food, and you know that there are people right around you that need so badly to get this food. So super exciting. I've been gleaning for 12 years now. I started a program in Kansas City with Society of St. Andrew. Melanie was talking about gleaners. Well, there's a SOS operation in Florida. Barbara Sales, she's a dear friend of mine and doing amazing work. We're connected with other gleaning organizations across the country, and it's incredibly important work. And Zach is really taken our gleaning program and moving it forward, and he's going to talk to you about our expansion. We're really excited with what we're doing this year in our gleaning program. Go ahead, Zach, take it away.
This year, as we've all seen, things have changed pretty quick, and we've tried to adapt along with them. So this year, as part of our expansion process, we actually recently acquired refrigerator space, and this space now allows us to store up to 30 pallets of produce at a time. So that has given us a chance to take in things like squash and watermelon here early in the fall, and be able to hang on to that for a couple days, couple weeks, and then be able to improve our distribution. So really get it to some of our smaller or less served agencies around town, and maybe get it to some folks who don't always have access to that kind of fresh produce. We are also working to get connected with some other areas around the Kansas City area. So we're moving towards Lawrence, which is a small college town where the University of Kansas is. We are working at that for 2021. And then we're also working with some of our partner food banks. So in Springfield, for instance, which is about 3 hours south of Kansas City, we've discussed some ways to maybe support some other gleaning operations in the state. Just continue to look for chances to grow. As Lisa mentioned, we get upwards of like 70 to 75 varieties of produce throughout the year from local growers. So really getting a big variety to people. The other exciting thing is that we get to see firsthand all of the different, all those different reasons and motivations for produce donation, produce rescue. So we see tomatoes and cucumbers that, they have a short shelf life and the market's suddenly flooded and it doesn't make sense to go and harvest those last 2 rows. We see, field melons and squash that maybe are a little too small or have a couple of bumps on them, and then they end up not going to the store. So we sort of see that full spectrum and range from our farmers, our markets, our big distributors, as well as our backyard gardens and orchards. So.
Yeah, moving a lot of we've doubled the number of pounds of fresh produce that we're moving through the gleaning program this year as compared to last year at the end of September. So doing a lot more, and we have a lot of hunger right now. We have a lot of food insecurity in our region, and we're doing what we can to address it.
Great. And Lisa and Zach, thank you for sharing the impact that you're having in your community. And I think that's a point that we should reiterate is like food insecurity and hunger across the country is just so high right now, and it's just startling, and we all need to do more to address food insecurity in this country. So very thankful to hear about the impact that you're having in the greater Kansas City area. We heard about what's going on in Florida, and now we are going to hear about what's going on in New Jersey and the Philadelphia area. And again, we're lucky to have Sonya Harris with us today. She's the founder and CEO of Bullock Garden Project Incorporated. Sonya is a former special education teacher with over 20 years of teaching experience. And as an educator, Sonya believes in taking learning beyond the four walls of the classroom and spearheading, and she spearheaded the award-winning Bullock Children's Garden at the Dorothy L. Bullock Elementary School in Glassboro, New Jersey in 2015. So she established the Bullock Garden Project to assist teachers and schools to cut through red tape and navigate how to build school gardens. She's a problem solver, and she's really done her part to really educate folks around about gardens and building future green industry leaders. She saw that during the pandemic, just like many of us, seeing just the impact of food waste and farmers like tilling under crops and being unable to sell hundreds and thousands of pounds of food. So she reshaped the work of her organization to better be able to serve folks who are experiencing food insecurity in our community, better be able to utilize foods from local farms, and be able to donate to them directly to folks who are experiencing food insecurity. And I really like this quote that she shares a lot, is that you have to plant seeds to grow futures. So I will turn it over to Sonya, and thanks again to everyone who spoke so far.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited and ready to go out and glean right now, even though it's nighttime. You guys have me all hyped. But thank you again for having me tonight. Yes, I am a retired special educator. October 1st was my 1-year retireversary. I taught for about 25 years. And during that time, I saw a lot of times where, you know, kids were bringing in chips and those little horrible Huggy drinks because they had no other option. Now, I taught in Glassboro. And a lot of people see Glassboro. I know we have some Rowan University reps on here, as this quaint little college town, suburb of Philadelphia. But Glassboro, actually, the town is a small town, a suburban town, but we very much have the demographic in our schools like an urban area. So what we found was a lot of our kids were starving. A lot of kids, when you see kids hoarding food at lunch and getting in trouble for taking food out the cafeteria because you're not allowed to do that. So when I started the garden, one of our passions about it was we have to feed these kids. We have to feed their families. So we were doing that and started this nonprofit. We're going to spread gardens around the globe. It's going to be amazing. Pandemic hits. And we were like, okay, well, and they weren't even guaranteed. And that kind of vision made me talk to my team and said, look, we've always been about feeding children. We need to feed everyone. We need to feed everyone we can. So we really delved into farming. I've always had a garden. I've turned my own personal foodscape into a foodscape farm for that reason, so we could feed people. But then we connected with Tom, and wonderfully, like, we were already doing some gleaning work. And because we couldn't stand to see the waste, and we knew people who were hungry. We knew people who, you know, had jobs, but were put on temporary layoff and then had no financial benefits, nothing. You couldn't get sick pay. They were getting turned down for unemployment, and they didn't have food. And we said, hey, we've got an answer. We can talk to some of these farms. We can get out there. We can pick whatever we can, and then we'll take this and we'll give it away. So we started doing that. And then we had this amazing opportunity for a grant through the EPA to take this gleaning and broaden it. So I'm an educator. I always go back to that. So what we're going to do, we love this gleaning now, and this is who we are. Pandemic, no pandemic, it has helped to shape us and just grow us in helping others. So now what we're going to do with the wonderful grant that we were able to get through the EPA is to take, well, I say children, kids, but youth who have come in contact with the justice system. So we talked about food justice and social justice. So now we want to intervene, and we want to take some of these kids who may have an interest in gardening, in growing. We want to show them that there's a viable life in the green industry. We want to take them out into the fields. We want to glean with them. We want to connect with them while they're out there. We want to talk to them. We have worked with one of our farms and said, hey, if kids are gleaning, could they take maybe some of the seeds and seed save? And we've had a couple of our farms say, yeah, they can definitely do that. So now we're taking kids out. They're going to glean. They're going to learn that there's good in just giving back. They're learning that this is how we respect the land. We are on the land of the Nanticoke Lenape, and this is a great way of respecting the land that we're on. And now we're going to show kids how to take this, measure it, see what's viable, see what's not, how they can sell it. I mean, at a very small fee, can they make some kind of living out of this, take some of that money, share it with the farm, have some for themselves, helping out their family economically, and then the rest of that food, look at it and go, okay, I can sell this percentage, but this percentage always has to be donated. Well, who are you going to donate it to? So now we're getting them involved in helping combat social justice and the food apartheid system that has been set up. And we're really excited about
Sonya, I think we lost your audio for a minute.
other people. Take the funds that you earn from that and help your family. Can you start your own business? Are you inspired to get into the green industry? You can have a record and still be productive in this industry. You can still be productive for the future and for the earth. So that is who we are. I am going to just take this last moment to say, if you are in the area, especially if you're from Rowan, we take interns. We're based in Glassboro. So we have kids who are working for us, and I am very excited about working with FRN at Rowan University. So if you would just like to learn anything, and this is to anyone, anything about what we're doing, yes, please get my email. I will meet with you virtually. I will talk about our process, and I will help plant those seeds to keep you growing. So I just want to thank everyone, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We appreciate getting to hear about your work, your solutions, being able to involve youth. That's really amazing. So we are now going to turn over to Sydney, who's going to be leading our Q&A section. So if folks have questions for our panelists, please submit them either through the chat or through the Q&A function here. And we definitely want to hear from y'all about like what you're interested in hearing more about.
All right, hi everybody. Thank you to all of our panelists again for bringing your expertise to this topic of solutions to farm food loss. Gustavo from University of Delaware had the same question that I had, so I'm really looking forward to your answers. And it is, the farm food waste arising from COVID-related supply chain shocks received a lot of press between March and June. This attention in the news media, I've read at least, seems to have dropped off. Could data resources please be offered about how this curve has evolved in the past 6 months? So this might be best directed towards Lisa or Tom, but then I'd also love to tack on to this how our more on the ground experts here have dealt with the influx of surplus food when it comes to gleaning?
Yeah, I just have a quick thing to add, because I don't know that there's data on, how much was lost in particular this year due to COVID. What I can say is that COVID has been a major disruption of our supply chain. Other examples of major disruptions include hurricanes, labor being stuck at the border, food safety recalls. So, let me put it to you this way. If there's a food safety recall, for example, for tomatoes, and it takes me 2 months to determine what was the source of that outbreak, all tomatoes in North America are pretty much suspect, and the entire tomato industry loses money. Food is wasted because of that. So I encourage you to just note that something like COVID is a major disruption, but that we have major disruptions all the time. They can be from policy, they can be from weather, they can be from food safety, but we do have these big piles of food left over, dumped, trashed all the time. Sorry, that was really depressing.
I'll make a comment about that. Thanks for the question. When the coronavirus/COVID came out, as I think it was Gustavo, I think that was his first name, mentioned all this news, New York Times, TV, it just went wild. It was broadcast, and that initiated a lot of incredible work. A lot of philanthropic money became available for a variety of different collections and salvage. One of the big reasons that the farmers had a lot of surplus was because food service and restaurants stopped buying because they were shut down. And so this huge market for a lot of produce evaporated in a short period of time. And I worked with some gleaners that were trying to help move some of that surplus. It just became like, what do we do with it all? Subsequently, what I've learned, for example, from Sonya and others, is that CSAs, on the other hand, are in a boom period, at least from people I talk to, because people that are home now want fresh produce, and they've signed up for CSA opportunities to get food in various ways delivered to them. And I can share this with you. I spoke to an individual who's responsible for organic farming organizations in South Jersey, and she told me, because I was trying to find out about the farm opportunities for gleaning and the earned revenue model that I mentioned earlier. And she said at this point in time, the farmers, the season in that location were pretty flush. They really didn't, they always say, like Lisa said, we don't have any surplus, but what they meant is that they really were having a great opportunity to sell a lot of their produce. So there's, it's back and forth, opportunities and distress. So that's kind of the way I see it right now. And I'm talking to people now about planning, in my world anyways, for next season, to ramp up the opportunities that we have to accelerate recovery and hopefully developing earned revenue models for moving some of that food into the marketplace, into where there's a need. And it's exactly what Sonya hit on. There's a lot of need, and there's a lot of people out of work, and a lot of donations. All these donations, all gleaners are millions and millions of pounds of food. But I tell you what, the food system's broken. It's not fitting into a very needy niche in every city and rural area around the United States, where people don't fall into the category of supplemental relief, but they still can't access it. And the trucks don't drive there. 18-wheelers don't drive down little country roads to small little towns like Glassboro. I've been on those roads. You don't get it there. We got to get it there. And that's part of fixing the food system. Don't be scared of making money. It's okay. It supports your option, it supports your opportunities, and it helps farmers. Okay, sorry.
I actually would like to share a little bit, if I could, with you regarding our experience. We're here in Kansas City, in the heart of America, and we have a lot of major distribution hubs in Kansas City for produce and other things. But whenever the pandemic hit, and so many restaurants and cafeterias and corporations and schools, all of these different food service channels shut down, and Kansas City was flooded. We had fresh produce at all these different distribution hubs, and they were, and then we had our local farmers too on top of this. So we had all of this fresh produce and nowhere, nowhere for it to go. So it was a crisis here for a while, and we were getting Zach was picking up from all these different distribution hubs, which is why we actually made a targeted effort to expand our gleaning program this year. We're doing twice as much this year as we did last year at this time. And it's because we recognized that this was our big opportunity to help our community by going, in March, there's not a lot growing here in Kansas City, but we had tons of opportunity through these different distribution hubs. So we secured cold storage so we could aggregate fresh produce from all these different areas. We're in the process of buying a dock high truck, cold truck, a refrigerated truck, so that we can pick up and bring in more of this fresh produce and then get it out through we work, like I said, about 600 plus agencies in the Kansas City, in 26 county area that we work with to get fresh produce. And actually we have a smaller group of agencies that we work with on a almost weekly basis throughout the gleaning season to get them fresh produce. So, and another thing that we experienced when all this was happening is the USDA Farms to Families Food Box Program. That was another situation through which our community was flooded with fresh produce. So there's just been a lot of challenges because of the pandemic and all of the crises that have, kind of coalesced around food and the lack of food. And it's not a shortage, a food shortage, it's a distribution problem that we're dealing with, and we've got to figure that out. That's it.
All right, we don't have so much time left, but I know, Melanie, you've been wanting to add something here, which would be great. And then Sonia, and then we'll move on to our one last question.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I wanted to say that in Florida, and I'm not sure if this is unique to Florida because we do have a large elderly population, but a lot of our volunteers that glean and work in the food banks are elderly. So when COVID hit, we had a huge drop in volunteerism. That was a problem in collecting the produce, getting the produce where it needed to go, helping the food banks distribute the food. So again, I speak to all of you, all of the students out there. Your state may have some similar situations, and that's one solution that you can engage in Florida. I have a web page. We're taking COVID very seriously. We have very specific protocols in place for gleaning to make it safe. But if you feel it's something you want to do, consider it, because there may have been a drop in volunteerism. And I know there was a question about working with Indigenous communities, and I just wonder if any of you are familiar with Barbara Eisworth, who works with a very large, successful refugee gleaning group in Arizona. So if you'd like to hear more about that, I'd be happy to make an introduction. Thank you.
Sonia, would you like to add anything on the note of coronavirus response? Okay, great.
Hi, yes, I did see that in reference to BIPOC communities. That is actually the goal. I'm sorry, my dog is scratching at the door. The goal of what we are doing, because I taught in a school that was predominantly, Glassboro. The people in need are overwhelmingly of color, and we have Black and brown people. With South Jersey, we have a lot of farms. This is, when you talk about the Garden State, our area is where the gardens are. And we have a lot of migrant workers who their children were also there. who were in need. So our focus is on feeding marginalized communities. So a lot of the work that we're doing, a lot of food went to the Kensington area of Philadelphia, which we are very passionately involved in. If you don't know about Kensington, please Google it. Talk about a community in need. They're very much in need. But also in our local communities, Glassboro, Camden, as you know, someone needs to get that food there. Like Tom said, the trucks don't deliver there. You want to talk about a food desert? It's a food swamp because it's just fast food. And the parents can't afford or can't get down to the grocery store. And we want to make sure we can get this food delivered to them. So again, local kids, let us know there's a job in this. We want to pay you to deliver some food. So please get in touch with us. We need to feed people. They need to eat. So let's do this.
Awesome. Thank you all. I'm going to move on to Joe's question, which a few of you have already touched on. Thanks so much. About what advice or experience you can offer working with communities such as Indigenous people, Black people, and people of color. And I'm going to tie this into Hannah's question too, of incentives to get farmers on board. And I'm hoping Lisa and or Melanie and anyone else, feel free to jump in. You can talk to how you approach farmers and talk about gleaning when it can sometimes feel like you're trying to take away their profit by asking for donations. So how do you approach those situations, find incentive, and then also do so in a culturally sensitive and inclusatory way?
So I'm happy to talk a little bit about how I approach farmers. I think that it's important to be really aware of your surroundings. Try to just be aware of how the farmer is reacting to you and the idea of gleaning. And if you can usually sort of suss out how they might feel about it, and then you can pick a path. So for example, if I feel that the farmer is not on board, they are not down with what I'm saying, I talk a lot about how it will benefit the farm. Farmers don't want to plow under. They want to see their produce go out. And I talk a little bit about how if they make a connection with a food bank, their logo might go on the bottom, some free advertising, tax incentives. If they're really on board, you start talking about some of the bigger picture stuff, how they're gonna save the world, how they are gonna solve the big problems we have, because by reducing food waste, you solve economic problems, social problems, environmental problems. So then they're superheroes. So I think it's just really important to try and look critically at the farmer and know that they are good people. They may have different reasons for engaging, and that's okay. And your job is to try and suss out what that reason is and then drive it home.
Yeah, and I just like to add to both of these questions, you know, it's about building relationships and getting to know the communities that you're working with and serving. So with our farmers, you know, some of them want to see that food go to maybe the town that's 5 miles down, that they, you know, go to town for every week for groceries and whatnot. So getting to know that they're serving the people that are right next door to them, I think sometimes makes a big difference, making that connection between farm to agency. And then to the other question with different communities, it's once again building those relationships and getting to know the communities you're serving and knowing what's culturally appropriate. So an example of that, we had a community garden grow aronia berries for us, and I had never heard of them. And I went to the KC Indian Center and I asked, you know, hey, I don't know what this is. You know, is this something you could use? They said, oh, chokeberries. And they gave me all these recipes and different ideas of how they would sort of serve their clients with it. And it was just this amazing opportunity for both of us to kind of get connected. And yeah, same thing, you know, when we have turnips or greens or items I'm less familiar with, it's just getting to know and having those relationships with your partner agencies and with your communities, being able to ask those questions and start a dialogue.
Yeah, recipe cards are so helpful, and having them in a variety of languages. At the Department of Agriculture, we do Creole, Spanish, English. We have a chef on staff. We do cooking demonstrations with recovered food, and we'll have an interpreter if we need one. I speak Spanish, so I do some of those. So helping people learn how to use the product, that's so important.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and your responses. We learned a lot about gleaning, a lot about how to get started with gleaning. So that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to helping more of our chapters find their way out into the farms. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to John to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Sydney. And I'm going to share 2 links with everyone. So I'll ask you to all do something as I begin to close out. The first link is to a registration link to our next webinar, which is November 6th or November 18th, focused on building an equitable food system. So please register for that. And then also please click the post-webinar survey to help us improve our programming and give us feedback on the content that we provided for y'all tonight. So I'm going to close out. While I'm talking, please open those links. And we definitely want to continue to see folks engaged in these conversations going forward. So thank you to our panelists for sharing key insights about solutions to farm food loss. I think y'all are so amazing, and really thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. We know that FRN student leaders are problem solvers, and several of our chapters have already gleaned food, and then there's so much more work that can be done there. And I think that the insight that y'all have shared with us is going to be really valuable for our network of students. And for folks on the call, if your chapter hasn't done so yet, I would definitely encourage you to think about how to address the food system in your community, how to really think holistically about what resources could be leveraged. The food that's being wasted or not harvested is right there, and really it's about building relationships and being able to make sure that you're connecting the dots in communities. I also want to highlight the work of our student gleaners, and then also the work of our student volunteers who are volunteering with the FarmLink project this fall. We have over 100 students and alumni that have signed up to virtually volunteer to ensure that unharvested food, unharvested produce is going to people who are experiencing hunger. So stay tuned to hear more about the impact that our students are having this fall with the FarmLink project. And then finally, we know that we need to build food systems that are sustainable and equitable. At the Food Justice webinar in September, we learned about the disproportionate impact that hunger has had on communities of color in the US, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx families who experience food insecurity at nearly twice the rates of white families. And tonight we learned about the challenges with the way our food system works, how we grow that food, and how that's distributed. And next month, we're gonna connect some of the dots there and really discuss how to build an equitable food system. So we hope that you are able to join us. With that, please complete the webinar survey. Please register for our next webinar, and definitely bring a friend or 2 or other chapter members to that conversation. And I want to thank all of our amazing panelists again. So thank you, and have a wonderful evening.